there is an extremely high chance that you should never squat or deadlift ever again. What's going on, guys? Today is episode 23 of the Foundation First Fitness Show with Bob Owen. And today we are talking about squatting, deadlifting, and why you might not ever want to do them again. Now, before I go into this, because I'm sure people probably just either slam their cars into a wall trying to figure out what the hell I was just saying if you were driving, and if not, if you're watching this on YouTube, you're probably freaking out going, hang on a second, there must be something else. You're probably scrolling forward, and now you're probably back, and you're like, hang on a second, I must have missed something. So really, the cusp of what I'm trying to say today is not that you should never be squatting or deadlifting again, but it really is very subjective. Is someone out there who might not be in the best position possible, are they squatting and deadlifting, and should they be doing it? So the reason you might not want to be squatting or deadlifting, okay, there's a couple of reasons why. And I'm going to talk about a specific scenario because I think this happens a lot more often than people think. A lot of individuals are like, oh, you must have missed something, But sometimes, you've really done everything. You've seen everybody you needed to see, and it just doesn't work. And this very much holds true for both cases, and I'll explain why in a little bit. So one of the things that can easily happen is individuals will try to squat or try to get a nice clean squat and try to get, a nice tall torso, get a nice shin angle, not shearing over the knees, no heels coming up, things like that. They're going to be spending a lot of time getting a good technique down, and they're really not going to get anywhere. They might get blocked. They might not be able to kind of like even get down to, the top of the thigh to parallel. They might be really struggling to kind of even get close to that without losing it at the back. And this really doesn't even have to be with weight. Someone can be doing this, just body weight plainly and really struggle. There's a couple of things that can really come up with that. And the same thing really holds true for deadlifting. Before I go on to that, there's this same case can occur with someone who's deadlifting. You might not be able to get into that position. Every time you try, it just feels awkward. No matter how much, mobility exercise you do, no matter how much activation, hip hinging stuff, and all the good stuff that we always talk about, no matter how much you do, it might not work. And that's okay. There's a way to get around that, and that's what I really want to discuss today with you and really kind of guide you guys into that direction if you're one of those people. And if you're not, it doesn't really matter. There's actually a good play for this into every single person, because I think that every single person is naturally either a better deadlifter or a better squatter. It's really hard to find someone who's going to be pretty darn good at both. And what this is going to do is it might be very good for you to kind of, think a little bit more about that, especially if you're someone who kind of favors one a lot more than the other, or just really can't perform one well. This may be really interesting for you, and this is probably where you're going to get the most value out of it. And so what can really happen with that? So let's say someone is trying to load up, they can't get down, they can't get into their squat position. The first thing that's going to happen is, if you can't get into that position, your hips are either going to try to get out of the way by dumping some of that weight into your low back. So your low back's going to arch, which is what we call that butt wink. Now, that doesn't always mean that it's the core. It doesn't always mean that it's the, lateral hamstring. It doesn't mean that it's a biomechanical issue. It could be, one of those three. But sometimes it's, like I said, it might be just that biomechanical issue, which is the thing we're talking about today. And that's unfortunate because it's really hard to work around that. And so let's say in that scenario, someone tries to do that, what they're basically opening themselves up to is an injury, right? And that's what we really want to avoid with this, especially if you start loading up pretty heavy. Now, heavy is a very relative term. Not every single person is going to think that 135 pounds is light. But at the same time, not everyone is going to be able to even get to that point, and they're going to be really stuck, but they're not really going to feel their legs working that much. They just might not be able to load up properly. So there's a couple of ways to work around that. And unfortunately, if you are in a situation where it is a biomechanical problem, it becomes a real struggle. And the reason I speak about that so much is that sometimes that biomechanical, I mean like in terms of like the mechanics of how your limbs move and their lengths and the range of motion that they have. I know that I've mentioned it a couple of times. For those of you who are just tuning in for the first time, I deal with a lot of hockey players. Okay, so hockey is a very interesting sport, and I'm trying not to I'm not trying to veer off too much. I'm trying to keep it very linear and not kind of go off on tangents, but I think this ties in well because it might help you kind of relate to it a bit. Hockey players are very unique athletes in the sense that skating itself is a very unnatural movement. And because it's such an unnatural movement and their body's doing so much external rotation at the hip, so basically their legs are opening up because they have to kind of turn and push back. Because that leg is opening up so much, they're very good external rotation. So they're very good at opening up the hip, but they're very bad at closing it. So their inability to get internal rotation, so the opposite direction, will really affect their ability to squat. So a lot of individuals or a lot of hockey players that are trying to squat, the first thing they're doing is they're taking a wider stance because they're trying to take advantage of going out and reaching a further distance and not calling upon that internal rotation as much. Now, this is a case where you're going to play to your athlete, or you're going to play to your body if you are that athlete. Now, this doesn't just hold true for hockey players. This holds true for every athlete. Every single athlete is going to have a predominance to do something. But at the same time, hockey players, the only reason why I bring it up is because they're one of those cases where squatting is really tricky on them, simply because the internal rotation is lacking so much. So a lot of what I do with my guys is I'm trying to break in that internal rotation. I'm trying to help them gain a bit more. So it's going to allow them to kind of get into that position where they're a lot more comfortable. And once they get into that position where they're a lot more comfortable, it's going to help them kind of move better. And what we're trying to do is kind of establish that neutral position, that nice balanced position, so all the muscles are firing properly. They don't constantly compound that dysfunction. But it has occurred, and it occurs quite often. It happened once today where a hockey player came in, spoke to me, and one of the issues that they dealt with was that they were struggling with squatting. And, you know, we had done some stuff. It'd been a couple of years and we had worked on some stuff. And it is tough because, you know, these hockey players, they're here for 3 months, then they leave and they're right back into that tight position or that dysfunctional position for 9 months straight and struggle to really get out of it because they're always on. They just keep going at it. But he came to me and he said, listen, you know, we're struggling with this. It's not been getting anywhere. I'm struggling to get down. And I said, listen, you know what? I think we just got to play to your mechanics. You know, we can't keep forcing this. Maybe you're just a better deadlifter, right? And so we shifted to deadlifting and everything went away. And all of his problems went away. You know, he was able to get the weight he needed up. He was able to build on strength. And we were able to take advantage of his mechanics. And he was actually a very good deadlifter. His body type was designed as a deadlifter. And this is something I'd been thinking about for nearly a year now, you know, really trying to understand the difference between the two and understanding the biomechanics that go into it, the limb length, from the torso length to the hip length, the femur length to the shin length, and all those different kind of components, and see how they all kind of interact with each other, which is really interesting. I'm not going to go over it now because it's a lot of technical numbers, and I'm just going to be yelling out percentages to you. No one's going to keep track. And so because of that switch and that shift into something else, what we have done is we've actually reduced the likelihood of an injury, right? We've taken away we've taken away kind of compounding and trying to push through a limitation. Now we're playing to that dysfunction. We're playing to that limitation, and we're actually allowing, and I say dysfunction, but I mean that in the most, the nicest way. What I'm saying is that we're playing to that ability. We're playing to his body. Instead of trying to force him into my workout, I'm switching it and making it very specific to him. And that's where a lot of that specification and the specializations in the workouts and really trying to make the workouts unique and tailored for that athlete and tailored for that individual. Now, this stuff doesn't only hold true for athletes. The only reason why I'm bringing it up is because earlier today I dealt with it. This is something that happens with everybody. with a lot of individuals. I myself, I know that I'm a better deadlifter than I am a squatter, but the difference is very small. So I'm still able to load a squat pretty well and not struggle because my mechanics aren't letting me down. One of the quick fixes to get around this, that doesn't require you to kind of give up on it completely. And a lot of individuals confuse this trick with something that's going to be helping you with basically lack of mobility at the ankle. And that is using an Olympic lifter shoe. So basically a shoe with a wedge in it. And I went like this, but it's a lot smaller than that. It's probably about there. Shoe with a wedge in it that's going to allow you to lift your heel up. It's going to force your body to shift more weight forward and kind of redistribute that weight so that you can stay a lot more compact and not have your hips shoot out far. And it also allows you to get deeper into your squat. Now, while I think that's a kind of considerably normal fix, I would highly recommend this for someone who really is serious for lifting. If you're not serious about lifting, don't do it. And the reason I say don't do it is not because I think it's a bad thing, it's going to set something off, but it's just really not going to set your body into that right position. You've got to play to your mechanics. But someone who's doing Olympic lifting, they have no options. They have no choices. They have to play to that dysfunction because that's what they're trying to do. So they're trying to gain a lot out of it. Now, I want to slide something in there. I'm going to slide something in there for those of you who are listening that have seen people with those wedge shoes underneath and are thinking about it and saying, hey, maybe I should get a wedge shoe, might help me squat better. I think you should very much exhaust every other alternative, then go to that, because there's a very small likelihood that your ankle is actually the limiting factor. So you want to make damn certain that it is actually your limb lengths that are slowing you down and not your ankle. Because an ankle thinking that it's an ankle limitation or thinking that it's actually going to, you really want to make sure that if it's an ankle limitation, you're not doing it by getting the ankle out of there and then trying to move with it. You want to clean up the ankle mobility, then try it again and see if you actually need that, right? We don't want to use that for ankle mobility issues. Clean up your ankle mobility, then use it. If you have a mechanical dysfunction, you can use it if you need to, because it might be something that'll help you. So that's for that kind of scenario. Now, the same thing holds true for a deadlifter, someone who can't seem to get to the bottom position because they feel like their back's always rounding. Now, I recently posted something, I think it was a couple of weeks back, posted something about, if you're struggling with deadlifting, and by struggling with deadlifting, I mean, are you struggling to keep that back straight? Are you struggling to push the weight back? Are you struggling to kind of keep that core tight? And if you've exhausted those kind of alternatives and the fixes, stabilizing the hips, stabilizing the back, stabilizing all those things, if you've kind of exhausted those things and now you're looking for that next alternative, yes, maybe switching over to a squat might be a good thing. Now that I've kind of shown you kind of two examples, what I did want to discuss is if the alternative does not exist for you to either deadlift better or whatever the case may be, or, you might not be able to squat because you might not want to use the shoes or maybe even the shoes might not even help. It's very possible that they might not be shifting your mechanics in the right way. And if you can't get to that squatting position, don't worry. It's totally fine. And I'll explain why. So your deadlift is a hip hinge dominant movement. So it means a lot of the movement's coming from the hip. Now, conversely, the squat is a knee dominant movement. So a lot of the movement is happening at the knee. The knee is one of the main providers of movement. So when that's the case, when your knee is one of the major cases and you struggle with that, what you could do is just say, okay, if I'm not going to be able to squat because it's not one of my favorable things, so I'm going to have to deadlift, and you're wondering, how can I leave all that leg stability, all that knee stability, all that knee dominant movements out of the equation? How do I do that? Well, it's simple. You just substitute a step up, you substitute it with a lunge, you substitute it with a split squat, right? You're getting that knee dominant movement in, or a more knee dominant movement in, and you're still going to be getting that kind of work done that you want. You're also getting a little bit of stability in there, so it's not a terrible thing. Now, on the other side of things, you might say, well, if I have to give up a deadlift to squat, am I giving up a lot? I really want to deadlift. I think there's a lot to gain there. Sure, you can do that. All you have to do is just take the knees out of the equation. And you go, I'm just gonna do all my hip hinging at the back. That's it. So you don't add any mechanical issues, because the second you introduce your knee, you introduce femur length and shin length. So basically thigh length and shin length. If you incorporate those two things, now you've kind of created that issue there, and you've added more pieces to the puzzle. There's more moving parts, and that's going to create that limitation. Getting rid of it completely and taking it right out of the way, now it becomes a hip dominant movement. So you can do like a stiff leg deadlift. You can do a hip bridge on the ground and get that hip hinge movement that you want, and not have to risk that inability to deadlift properly and then put yourself en route to an injury. So if you can manage to pull those couple of things off and just really restructure it and understand, what your priorities are, and say, hey, if I can get away with it, why not? Right? Like, I don't want to risk hurting myself when I can just make up for it elsewhere, because the deadlift and the squat are very good exercises. But if you can't do one and you have to do the other, you're going to still be getting a lot. You're not leaving. Honestly, I really don't think you're leaving all that much on the table, and when I say not leaving a lot on the table is, sometimes, yes, you might be able to squat and you might get a goblet squat in where you pull that weight up closer to you, so it brings your center of gravity up and it starts shifting and playing around with the mechanics a bit of it. Yeah, that's a great way of doing it. That's an alternative. That's a very viable alternative and viable solution. And what you're going to want to do in that scenario is just understand that you can't go very heavy with it, because if you go very heavy with it, you might not be able to hold it, so you might have to put it on your back, and because you do that, it may shift your mechanics again. So, honestly, it's a really tough conversation to have. It's a tough discussion to have, especially for an athlete, someone who really kind of uses and relies on one of those two exercises. Generally speaking, it's a squat, especially for someone who relies a lot on the squat for that leg strength. It's very hard for them to kind of pull away from that. And I understand it. You've done so much work with it and you've done so much with it. Why am I getting rid of it? And there's so many benefits with it that it's really hard to just kind of put it on the side, because you feel like you're leaving so much on the table. But at the end of the day, you're just playing a lot more to your strengths, which might actually help you a lot more, because your squatting might be causing more of a weakness, and it might be slowing you down because of a lack of performance and a lack of proper and smooth mechanics. It might end up just being a waste of time. So I would really pay attention to that in the next couple of weeks. Spend some time looking at your limitations and really exhausting those options. If you are someone that struggles to squat, if you've cleared off the hips, if you cleared off the knees, if you cleared off the core, either on the deadlift or the squat, and if you can't figure out why it's not working, maybe try figuring out which one of those two you're better at. If you know that you can't squat, but you deadlift like perfectly, you go, hey, I've exhausted it. I've looked at the stability, and I've looked at all that, and I've looked at my hip stability, and I've looked at my core stability, and nothing seems to be the problem. It seems to just be my inability to actually get down there without rounding the back. Go to a deadlift, problem goes away. Hey, now I'm just going to use the other exercises to get it, because you're going to get that stability, knee stability, hip stability, core stability out of a single leg exercise, which is great. So it's not a lot lost, but it's really something to think about that might actually help you advance a lot faster. So thank you guys for paying attention. If you haven't subscribed on my YouTube channel, definitely hit that subscribe button. Thank you very much for those of you listening on the podcast. Really, really enjoy talking to you guys on a bi-weekly twice a week, or bi-weekly means 2 times. I can never get that. I think it means both, really. Anyway, really like talking to you guys 2 times per week now. I jumped that up a couple of weeks ago, and I think it's really doing a lot better for me now. Looking at getting a couple of guests on a couple of episodes, and really excited for what's to come. Guys, I am a big fan of all of this stuff and all of these things that I talk about. So really try to take some of that to heart. Take some of the stuff, use it, put it to good use. Let me know what you guys think about it. And until the next time, guys, keep building that foundation.